Thank you very much for this invitation to speak here today. I am very happy about this visit to DePaul University, which unfortunately will end today, sometime this afternoon. But always good things have an end. And I guess the beauty of having an end is allow us to a new beginning. So I hope that what we together share today is not going to end at the door of this auditorium, but maybe mark a new beginning once we go out of this auditorium. I feel very humble here after the introductions because I'm speaking to the experts. And sometimes when you speak to the experts, you really need to be a little bit careful about what you say and how you say it. However, having been a professor at the University of Chile, at the Catholic University in Santiago, at the Catholic University in Valparaiso, at the time of our social revolution, we had one thing in mind at the time: to protect the integrity and the freedom of the university. And so I believe that in a university environment is exactly an environment not to please the establishment. Is the environment where everyone here has the right to express its own opinion in a pluralistic and respectful way. So I will not stop myself from saying what I have to say today, and I hope I will not offend anyone, and it's not my intention, but I think we are living times where we cannot just wait any longer. I think for those who are sitting comfortably somewhere, they must understand that there is a lot of action taking place, and the university must be the first sponge to capture what's happening outside, so learning doesn't become a collection of theoretical propositions, but actually becomes a mirror image of human reality. I'd like to start with 2 or 3 different things that might canvas a little bit what I'm going to say today. I was a soccer player for many, many years. Actually, I played soccer semi-professional in the United States, in the Midwest. I was a goalkeeper. And so I was fascinated by many things that have happened in soccer, in football, as we call it in Latin America. One of them was an interview that was given to Pelé, Edson Arantes do Nascimento. Pelé scored thousands of goals in one career. So in an interview a few years ago, he was asked, how come you score so many goals? And Pelé's answer was, I saw them 3 seconds before they happened. I saw Pelé only 3 times in my life. I was very young, and actually I could not figure out how he would send the ball to some place in the field where I would never send the ball there, but there was always someone there to receive that ball or score a goal, you know. Beckenbauer, you know, the president of the FIFA, you know, the International Federation of Football, his answer was almost identically the same, you know, that he had this something that allowed him to be such a good German soccer player, probably as good as Pelé and probably one of the best in the history of football, you know. When Michael Jordan retired, he was asked also, how come you score so many baskets, you know? And I don't remember exactly the details of the interview, but I remember something like this. I go to the locker room, I visualize the basket before the game, and then I execute in the court. My final story, before I get into the topic, but these are the stories of the topic, because if we don't understand this, this has no meaning. I went to Russia. When I was at the World Bank, I was asked to help Russia on a project in Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal is probably the only source of fresh water that is almost untouched. Now it's very touched, unfortunately. And I had a driver, Vasily, who was absolutely a crazy guy, in the good sense. You know, he was really a driver you don't like to have because of the speed at which he drove, and also in a very not very well maintained sort of Russian Lada Fiat type of car. But one day he said, I know about your spiritual inclinations, you know, So I made this tour for you outside the World Bank. I want you to come with me because I want to show you something. So Vasily took me to this incredible, beautiful, exuberant, spectacular monastery of the Orthodox Church. A functioning monastery. It was not a museum, And this is the center stage for artists who paint icons. Icons, those in wood and silver, It's a very interesting art. So I went through many pieces of these icons on the wall of many rooms in the monastery, and I realized a couple of things which were very interesting. One is that the expression of the saint or Christ or Mary, whoever they were putting into this icon, was not like the same expression you see in other paintings. There was something alive in these paintings, that the expression of the eyes, I don't know what it was, but basically it was something very, very powerful. So I asked the abbot of the monastery who accompanied me everywhere, I said, how many weeks someone takes to actually paint these icons? And to my astonishment, I will not be astonished now, but 20 years ago I was astonished. He said they take at least 6 to 8 years. So I said, how come, This is just a little piece of wood. It's not too much surface. This is not a mural of some stadium. He said, nobody can paint in this monastery unless he has at least 2 or 3 years of meditation on the figure, on the spiritual being they want to paint. Then they have 2 years of understanding colors, because all colors in that monastery are natural colors. They combine dirt with certain color with urines of cows and make yellow, and it's a very, very interesting process. And then they have 1 year to study the use of egg whites in the finishing of these icons. So I said, wait a minute, how come 293 credits makes me a PhD, How come I finished my PhD in 2.5 years? Why these people have certain conditions to get where they want to go, and we don't want to fulfill these conditions? So today, when we talk about this issue of the spiritual dimensions of entrepreneurship, we need to go to the roots of a fundamental question, which is, what does it make an entrepreneur? Because, I have a son, 34 years of age. His name is also Alfredo. One day he gave me a huge lecture. When I said, you as an empresario, he said, I'm sorry, I am not an empresario, I am an entrepreneur. And you better understand the difference, So he gave me a big lecture about the difference between an entrepreneur and a business person. Now, before I enter into the topic, for many, many years I've been looking into the role of spirituality in economics, and I already lectured on that. I will not lecture on that today. But also, I've been fascinated by the connection between spirituality in the workplace. Why should this? So I have done a lot of research, and I found one research study in the United States that it shocked me. They interviewed 253 very young managers, sort of moving up into the ladder, and they were asked, what really motivates you in your career? And these young managers responded that almost, I think, number 12 or 13, that they only around that level, not first 2, 3, 4, 5, about money. Money was not their motivation at all. Maybe we, the old managers, maybe are different after all these scandals about the perks and so on. But these young managers, didn't put at the top. The top was personal growth. That was the first answer. The most popular answer was personal growth. They also talk about autonomy, satisfaction, trustworthiness, capacity to make decisions freely. It was all a collection of human values. Autonomy is a human value. It's not something you buy in the supermarket. Trustworthiness, it's also part of yourself. Satisfaction, there is nothing more personal than defining satisfaction. I'm sure if we do a research here, everyone will answer differently. Then, accompanying this particular survey, there was a survey for workers. And here are some numbers that are also, to me, not abnormal after having been at the World Bank and having conducted attitude surveys of World Bank staff. In the United States, 72% of the workers say they work more than 8 hours a day. 61% think that they are flooded with work, that work floods them. 86% is not satisfied with its work. This is a huge number. You can imagine. So in your company, the probability of finding a satisfied person with the work is only 14%. The probability is that 86 times out of 100, the person you pick up will say, look, there is something wrong with what I'm doing. 82% is very dissatisfied with the relationship between work and its private life. I remember when we did a survey, 2 or 3 surveys at the World Bank, this was the worst part of the survey. And it reflected in the rate of divorce, suicides, alcoholism, drug abuse, etc., etc. When the work invades your private life. And the last statistic, which also is very frightening for those who are managers. I don't know. I see people who have face of managers. Maybe they are not, but they look like managers to me. 86% hopes to change jobs in the next 6 months. So what is your stability? How your stability looks in the long term. These are all in the internet, and they are all published statistics. I didn't do this research, I just used the numbers. I think what all of this is calling for is a huge challenge to find a new way, a new architecture, a new structure for corporate world in the future. There is no doubt that something is happening that keeps us very close to the wall, and we might hit the wall. In Portugal, for example, where I live, when the government announced that we were facing a world crisis, you never saw such a run into bankruptcy ever in Portugal. The owners went immediately to close business. We are in a crisis, sorry, you are unemployed, out. They have created 430,000 unemployed, which is a lot of people, because in Portugal there are only 2 million families. The country has only 10 million people. So when you have a family of let's say 2.5 million families in the country, let's say half of them work, so you have 1 million and some people in the workplace. So if you unemploy 430,000 in 3 or 4 months, is not really a good scene, And actually the left-wing parties of Portugal are saying those who have profits cannot fire anyone. We are in a time of crisis. So there is this tension between the thinking of the corporate world and what is happening there. I've been thinking about this topic of spiritual entrepreneurship for over 25 years. At the beginning, nobody listened at all. It was absolutely something very spiritual, That's the way people refer at the time. And I have gone through a cycle of 3 stages. The first stage of my learning curve was to try to understand the corporate world in developing countries. Because I come from a developing countries, what is the relation between business, domestic as well as coming from abroad, and the environment? Chile, at the time when I was doing this study, 80% of export of Chile were minerals, so were extractive industries. And what was left behind the extractive industry were huge holes, environmentally impossible to recover, And socially, the mining workers, are not the ones who get the highest salaries and have the best situations in our countries, not only in Chile. You just go to Pennsylvania and you will find out what a coal mining town is and how it works. It took me a long time to understand this, and I don't really pretend that I understand it, but I went to a second cycle in learning, which I decided to get into this concept of social corporate responsibility. So I decided to try to contribute to this corporate responsibility. And I think where I got frustrated was the lack of consensus of what the term responsibility really means. And I'll come back to this in a minute. And the other source of my frustration was that the corporations began to use the language very, very well, very quickly. So all these internet sites began to change. They were absolutely beautiful. There is basically no website of a large corporation that doesn't have these pages of social responsibility. But the public, this is not I'm not standing here to criticize corporation. I'm just putting a diagnostic to put my topic into place, If you ask the public in general, they don't believe. There are cases, there is a beautiful case, Exxon Valdez, and it's been written a lot in the literature, in economics, in environmental economics, in social sciences. There was a huge debate about whether Exxon actually believed in the environment of Alaska or not, So the public in general are seeing this language being sort of high volume, but practice very low volume. The third part of my cycle is this one on entrepreneurship. And basically my question was whether the debate on entrepreneurship ended at the level of social entrepreneurship, which Professor Chada already mentioned in his introductory remarks, which I really, really appreciate very much. Whether the story ends with social entrepreneurship. And my answer to you is actually it does not. And the second thing that is very linked to this is the question of entrepreneurship and styles of management. I think many people are running very fast with the topic of entrepreneurship as a separate issue from corporate management, and I don't think this is possible to separate, particularly if you are in the business of incubators, for future technology, action, and so on for the corporate world. So I got entangled into these two topics. One topic is to say something about entrepreneurship, but at the same time say something about management. So entering now directly into this swimming pool, I will combine some of these topics. I will not talk exclusively about entrepreneurship and try to dissect it to the last cell, but really give you a perspective also on what's happening at the management level. Because the temperament in the corporate world is like a unity. It's not something that you can separate. The trends, it's going in all directions. So one way to really enter into this conversation is to transit into a debate on values. And I ask myself the question whether there are new and universal values that everyone could adhere to. Because if we talk about social corporate responsibility, or if we talk about the future trends of entrepreneurship, and actually we have no agreement on the value system that support these trends, then these are all short-term gains somewhere and net losses very quickly. So the question is whether universal values exist for the corporate world everywhere to adhere to. Secondly, whether there is a set of universal values that entrepreneurs and managers should adopt in their everyday practices. And so we can compare, an entrepreneur or a manager in Santiago, Chile, with one in Chicago, and the conversation will be such that they will understand exactly where they are in reference to these values. Or whether the corporate world actually is self-normative. In other words, they create their own norms, their own values for themselves, and different from the rest of society. Is this possible? Is this desirable? That actually we in our society have a code, like playing tennis. We need to know what the rules of tennis are. So the corporate world plays another tennis game, and we play this tennis game. For example, in our tennis game, we use the inner line to see whether you score, but the corporate world can have the outer line whether they keep playing the game or not. This is very important. And it's not an esoteric question, because then how do you teach students in a university if you have not answered these questions? What type of product are you creating if you are not value-based? I don't know what are based. Textbook-based, you know. If you're not value-based in teaching, particularly in a Catholic university like this one, you know, what is this? So in doing this debate on transiting to these goals and objectives of corporation, whether they are universal or not, to the students of this university, not to the faculty, I will leave a questions while I keep speaking for you to reflect upon. Whether it makes any difference to study entrepreneurship in DePaul University or in the University of New Delhi or the Indian Institute of Management or in INSEAD in France or in Peking in China. Does it really make any difference? Should it make a difference for me as a potential student to make that choice, or actually it doesn't matter? Now, I did a study of curricula that doesn't speak much, you know. It's like a menu in a restaurant. Unless you really taste the food, basically, you don't know whether it's a good Thai food or not. But if you look at theoretically for someone, you find that actually all these programs are identical. The MBAs are basically identical. I remember like 150 students from India came to Geneva when I was ambassador for the World Bank in Geneva. And they wanted me to speak about management. Like if they wanted to know more accounting, finance, and so on, you know. I said, no, I want to know from you whether you feel you are different. You know, what is the difference between having a graduate from the Indian Institute of Management and a graduate from DePaul University? Where would the dialogue go? Where is the common ground and where are the differences? If there are no differences, then we have a serious problem. The university has become part of a very unknown, you know, orderless type of entrepreneur. So when we transit into these values, it is very difficult to find people who will agree that there are certain universal values. Many people say, look, you know, this is Indonesia, you know. You don't ask, you know, the Indonesians don't think the same way as the people from Chicago, you know. We are willing to sacrifice some points here and some points there. The value of profit, naturally, is very important. And that is not very contested. I think everyone in corporation will say, look, this is my duty. And if you ask Milton Friedman, well, Milton is not here anymore, he will say, that's the only value of a corporation. Don't even worry about anything else. This is the same debate at the international level with the World Trade Organization, isn't it? They're in the commercial business. They are in the business of commerce and trade. But if there is a labor issue, go to the ILO, you know. If there is an environmental issue, go to UNEP. You know, don't bring it here. Here we just try to figure out onions and fish, you know. And if we can get this equation right, it's okay. Some student will say, Alfredo, this is not true. You know, actually we have this triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line, it's very simple. Profits, environment, and social. But I ask myself whether this is possible. And I say it's not possible unless certain things are met. First, because mathematically speaking, there is no way to work in a transitive way in this triangle. That is to say, if solution A, you know, has this high level of profit preserving the environment is not a sufficient condition that this solution will give you a socially desirable outcome. The same thing if you do profit and social, it doesn't necessarily say that you will have an environmentally acceptable solution. So there is not a method to deal with triangles. You need an objective function on the top of it to resolve this. And my PhD was actually on optimal control theory, trying to figure these things mathematically. So this approach is intransitive. Is A is greater than B and B is greater than C, does not follow that A is better than C. Secondly, and more important, because this is a theoretical thing that we will not really resolve here, is that the market as an instrument, as a signal sender to corporation, does not send the same coherent signals, the same decibels of sound to the three equally. The market is not sending the same signals to profit as it sends to the environment or to the social impact. So if the market, which is the core of a corporate world, is not actually sending the signals equally to these three, the question is, how do you get them to be coherent in one place? Where will this coherence come from? Now, Adam Smith, one of the founders of economics, said, don't worry, sooner or later, the individual behavior will amount to collective behavior. And he talked about the invisible hand, that there is some invisible hand that will maneuver everything in a way that actually what is individually acceptable, it will be collectively acceptable. And most of us economists make money out of this debate of individual choices versus collective choices. If you look at economics writing, most of it is, even environmental economics, which is my specialty, is about the economics of this triangle. Secondly, this triangle is not new. This is a copy of what we did in the environmental economics. Who is come first or not, it doesn't matter. I'm sure if I'm in the faculty of economics, I will say, we were first. We talk about economics, economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. This was the first concept of sustainable development, although we never defined what this meant. And we never defined what this means either. It's easy to define this one as it is easy to define this one because we have spent a lot of attention on economics and on profits, And then we link this triangle here to the theory of economic growth. So economics sustainability was linked to man-made capital, physical and financial. Environmental sustainability to the environment, environmental capital. And the social to social capital. And many of us work in different things in a very isolated way because to understand this relationship is not trivial. This is another thing people talk about, yes, triple bottom line, but these relationships are super complex. What is the relationship between the technology of the company and the net pollution impact of the company? You really need to be a professional of high quality to really give this and say, yes, actually, I am responsible for so many particles per. Impossible. The same thing about the impact on the social. Many corporations in my country will say, this thing is the government, I cannot do social engineering in Chile, I'm just Exxon. If you expect that I will do social engineering for Chileans and replace the democratic system and replace government, then something is wrong. I used to say the same thing when I was at the World Bank, I was not responsible for social engineering. I cannot do social engineering in India. I think the Indians know better than anyone else how to do social engineering in their own country. I cannot come from the Hilton Hotel for 2 weeks every 6 months, and do social engineering in India, so I will change the caste system of India. It's not possible. I think it's too pretentious and absurd to do that. So when we talk about this triple bottom line, it looks so simple, but it's not so simple. There are not too many experts on this bottom line. I was in Paris not long ago, at a major conference on entrepreneurship and human rights. I might send you the paper because I tried to connect human rights with this. What was most interesting, it was the aggressive tone of the people in the entrepreneurial school of not accepting a debate on human rights, to the point that they took it out of the conclusions of the whole conference. And someone who had a very high level and power level in the UK, he said, Alfredo, your statement is so good, but we in our world today, with the world crisis, there is not even a triple bottom line, there is only one bottom line, which is profit. And this is real. This is not something, that I am doing it in an easy way and sort of dropping a footnote here. There is a big crowd in that world that believe that this triple bottom line really doesn't go very far. By the way, the corporate world is not the only one facing this. We are facing a world crisis today, and I find two attitudes. One attitude is saying, what crisis? I have been lecturing in Portugal, and a very powerful businessman. I don't want to confuse the terminology, so my son, when he sees the tapes, will not really teach me again about the difference. He said, it's no crisis, there's no crisis. So then I went back to him and I said, well, who created this then? So what is this, Is there or there's no crisis? And then the other one is that this crisis has a very important element in it, different from every crisis I have participated in since 1973. This crisis is a collective crisis. It's not an individualistic, materialistic crisis. That is to say, it needs collective instrument and collective solutions. And we don't have the collective institutional arrangement to do it. The same thing happened with the triple bottom line. This part of the bottom line, you can do it yourself. You have good people to really get your profit going. But environment and social are collective issues. They are not private issues. So even the conceptual framework behind this, the value system running these three, is completely different. So how do you create an objective function that allows you to move here or here when these are private and these are all collective? So I continue going on this issue of universal values, and I only found one document actually that has a world consensus on universal values, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that nobody cares, that nobody respects, And I dare in Paris in September, when I met Pat there, I dared to say, look, the world has evolved, let's look into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and do the changes needed, because we are in 2009 and not in 1948. And one very high-level minister, former prime minister of a European country, said, Alfredo, there is not a mood to create any collective consensus today, so don't tinkle with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because if we submit a new set of rights, a new understanding of human rights, in his view, and I think he's quite right, there is no way that the United Nations system will say, yes, now we have a new Declaration of Human Rights. So we are in a problem here, we are in a quantum when we talk about business, corporations, entrepreneurship, is this tension between individual existence and collective existence. And these are fundamental elements to actually get into entrepreneurship and spiritual entrepreneurship. I would say that when we talk about entrepreneurship, we are going through a cycle that doesn't have two levels, just three. And it's not really geared or determined by external factors alone. Like when I read some of the things that are in the internet, and maybe I am not interpreting well what is in the internet, you know. Explore, launch, grow, and evolve. But all the reference points are external. It's the business evolution, it's the exploration of business opportunities and so on. Nothing in this write-up talks about my inner exploration, my inner growth, my inner evolution. Now, when I was young at the World Bank, we were interested in business entrepreneurship. You know, people who were very aware of the business, you know. And I remember trying to find animal implements, plows and so on, of a different type to preserve animals in Asia. And we found, you know, these business entrepreneurs in Australia that had very interesting animal implements where the farmer and the animal will benefit from it. The way in which the implement is attached to the animal, and the fact that instead of going behind the plow, you can sit. You know, so they had little wheels. You know, we found a lot of business entrepreneurs. In the world of business that you are in here in Chicago, this means that business entrepreneurship is someone who really understands business and creates, you know, in that environment. So we have better technology, more profits and so on this line here. The next stage of the cycle is what you mentioned, is social entrepreneurship. To create an individual that is capable to actually not only be aware of the business, accounting, finance, planning, marketing, client orientation, whatever you want to put in that entrepreneurship, but you are looking for someone who also has a high level of awareness of the environment within which the corporation operates. And these are the other two bottom lines, because there is a human environment outside and there is a natural environment outside. But my contention with this, and there is an article in the Sol Journal of MIT when I first put this term spiritual entrepreneurship like 10 years ago, is that you cannot just be aware of the environment without being aware of yourself. It is not possible to dissociate, you know, the environment from yourself. So my contention and my proposal today is that we need to move from business entrepreneurship to a social entrepreneurship, and from social entrepreneurship to what I call a spiritual entrepreneurship. And a spiritual entrepreneur is an individual with high identity, high self-identity. This is not ego, I'm talking about self-identity. That is to say, is fully aware of him or herself. Doesn't mean that we are equal. We might be very different in the way we are because our identity is different. But for example, let's say that I come from a country X, and in my own awareness, poor people are lazy, they are alcoholics, and they are, you know, not interested. Let's say that's my view. How would I deal with the triple bottom line on the social side? I would really not care too much. How do they express this in many articles even? This is the cost of development. You know, I'm sorry, Alfredo, but that's the cost of development. These people need to be worse off for everyone to be better off. I have heard this argument so many times in so many sophisticated ways and politically correct ways, but the argument is there. Needless to say that in my career as an environmental economist, I heard the same argument about nature. So you really want to benefit the trees and not the people? Well, it's not that way. You know, if you put me in that corner, naturally, you know, but homocentricity is not necessarily the way to resolve this triple bottom line. So if I don't have awareness, or if my understanding of nature is that we have unequal intelligence, that nature is inferior to be conquered, you know, is given to me, I do whatever I want with it, then my self-identity embodies that view, and that self-identity influences my capacity to act as a social entrepreneur. I live in a village where they produce pears. rock pears, these green pears, very hard, And the population who is producing this pear is around average age 70 years of age in my area. There are no agricultural workers. There are no young people. Actually, I look very young in that population. I'm not that young, but in relation to them, I am one of the young guys of the village. What do they do to survive? They over-mechanize. They use a huge amount of chemicals, on fertilizer and pesticides. They use huge amounts of hormones to keep the flowers, tagged to the trees, so they have more pears per tree. So what you are eating at the end of the day, is something that looks absolutely beautiful, but your health system is really awful. So what do I find in the village? In 4 years that I've been in the village, I have found elderly people who walk very well, who begin to walk slowly, who are in a wheelchair, and they are dead in 4 years. Why? Because these pesticides attack the back of your brain, so attacks your spine cord, and so you cannot walk anymore. And this is every week, every 2 weeks, the chapel of the village has these bells that ring, and I say, oh, it's not mass. This must be someone else. So you come out of your house, go to the chapel, ask who died, and there is the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So your own self-identity, what I call spirituality, because to me, spirituality is not religion. Is the path towards yourself, the finding of yourself. It is impossible to create social entrepreneurs if they are not highly developed spiritual entrepreneurs. Now, this is a fundamental thing for this university. This is a Catholic university. If you are creating social entrepreneurs, yes, I know about the environment, but you don't know about Christ. I'm not Catholic, by the way, so I'm not picking on Catholics. If you don't know about Christhood, if you don't know about Vincentian, you mentioned the word Vincentian. Saint Vincent de Paul, I know his life very, very well. I used to study saints for many years. Saint Vincent de Paul was for the poor. Saint Vincent de Paul didn't come here and say, okay, rich guys, we are all together. No, Saint Vincent de Paul went for the poor. Saint Vincent de Paul went for those who were against the establishment. And many of his congregations around the world were kicked in the back and kicked out of the countries. They were seen as very much of a nuisance in many countries because they would say, no, excuse me, this is not the way it needs to happen. You need to protect this guy, you need to have rights, and so on and so forth. So what type of entrepreneur are you going to do? A guy who is fantastic at accounting and so on and creates in that environment? Or a guy who has some social notion that the environment is good and social is good? Or someone whose self-experience is to understand and relate to the social capital and this environmental capital? I will go for the latter. I will only speak for a couple of more minutes. I had other things to say, but I don't have the time. I must say that after having been in many formal management courses in the top universities of this country and in Europe, that I am appalled by the little importance that self-development has on management. Most of the theories of management are based on behavioral modification. Behavioral modification. You change your environment, you have a supportive environment, and then you will behave differently. I remember coming out of these courses totally renewed. I had all the toolkits that anyone could have. Even I work with psychiatrists, with psychologists who will film me, hidden films, and the end they will take 2 or 3 hours of film and say, look, Alfredo, when you were in this mode, you should have done this, and so on. I learned all the stuff. I went back to the bank with all this toolkit. After 2 weeks, I realized that everyone was behaving in a different way. Why I be the nice guy, So I went back again to my old ways of doing business in management. Why? Because it's very difficult to change everyone's environment, So the question is whether this environment that you find in the university is the same environment you will find outside. And one thing I learned in my career is that the large majority of management books are written from the perspective and for managers. There are very few books, if any, of management written from the perspective of those who are managed. So if you ask people how you are managed, people will say, we are managed by terror, by fear. So I wrote an article. I have not published it because I am afraid it's going to be a little bit too different, about managing by terror. And it's amazing, how many instruments we have created. And I was taught many of these instruments in these universities. What was the beginning of the story? Alfredo, corporate culture takes time to change. So when you are a manager, let's say you become a manager tomorrow of one department here, be patient, You cannot go on rampage. And they have done studies, for example, at Harvard and MIT that shows that corporate culture takes 5 years to be changed, actually. It's not 1 minute to the other. So don't be impatient and tell Joe and Mary, do this and that, because first you need to do something else before you begin to change this culture. But part of the course in management was to create accelerators. So instead of 5 years, you can change the corporation in 2. I give you some tactics. How about that? For free. One tactic was to create false crisis. And actually they bring to the class, after you go 1 or 2 sessions, looking at these case studies on how do you create false crisis. One of the classes was about creation of false crisis within the World Bank, actually. There is a case at Harvard, and they must be in the internet. These are not private information. Then the third day, they bring all the guys and the gals that were involved in creating this false crisis. And you discuss with them how this and that and that and that, Another techniques of managing by terror is to actually vacuum people from their own values. Vacuum away your values. Like I was told when I joined the World Bank, when I was a young economist, that my value system was worthless, that it was not relevant. This is a corporation. The corporate values are relevant because you will work in Muslim countries, Buddhist countries, dictatorships, democracies. You cannot come with your value system there. Very interesting logic. And then I realized after 2 or 3 years, well, what is my contribution to this whole thing? Can I be an Anglo? Behave like an Anglo? Speak like an Anglo? Not very easy. I'm a good parrot. But I was not good enough to keep going in my life like this. Can I be a Franco? No, and I work in Francophone Africa, actually. I was the lead agricultural economist of West Africa. But I couldn't be a Franco. I needed to be a Chileno. I needed to be a real individual, spiritual entrepreneurship is my self-identity guiding this. And I realized that it took me 3 years to actually make the turn. I was in panic. I thought people would think that maybe I went cuckoo, Actually, they value it. They found that I was a real interest in Alfredo, It was not the same guy that repeated the same argument that everyone was repeating, saying the same thing to please the politically correct establishment. So I'm encouraging you to really understand that there is a profound point here, that if you are not yourself, you have no authority to talk about diversity. Diversity, the key of diversity, is to be different together. It's not to be equal separately. And I think this is very important. The other technique of managing by terror was to use negative feedback, so to kill your self-confidence. The other one was to destroy the employee's self-worth by giving them impossible tasks that you knew that the employee will not be able to do, so you become the hero as a manager. Because after a while, when you're sinking, then you are the one who has the life jacket, this boss is really good, I was not doing very well. But actually the boss knew that you could not make it. The other thing is to create group dynamics to create crisis of loyalty between us, the employees, this comment, this thing, and all of a sudden, it's Joe. Oh, no, Joe, this guy, impossible. Joe is my friend, how he could do this. And all of these techniques, are part of a huge crisis of your own spiritual reality. Who you are, what are you doing here, why are you an entrepreneur, why you are not an entrepreneur, why you are a doctor and an engineer. So let me end by saying that DePaul University needs to become the first world incubator of spiritual entrepreneurs. Genuine, real, based on the philosophy of DePaul University. And DePaul University should encourage others who have no Christian values but have other values, Islamic values, Jewish values, Buddhist values, to do the same in their own grounds. Because the stronger, the better this individual is, the easier will be for this individual to understand the spectrum of the rest of the world. Otherwise, to tell the world that you are creating social entrepreneurs without creating a spiritual entrepreneur is a false proposition, because these people have no way to understand me, I'm part of the social, you who are part of the social, if they don't understand themselves. So I said, the same for management. You should not manage anyone if you cannot manage yourself. This is a very important proposition. And I was in the team, in the camp of many people who manage when I could not manage myself. And the way to cope with this crisis, inner crisis, was to drink more, smoke more, etc., etc., etc. I think the Smiles sort of agree that this is not something fake. I was an alcoholic. I smoked 3 packs a day to maintain my level of sanity, but it was not sanity in a sense, was high level of toxicity in an environment where I did not have my very strong self-identity that I have now. Thank you very much. I'm ready to answer any question you may have. I think this runs until 11 or something. Yes, sir, please.
In that connection or transition from business to social to spiritual entrepreneurship, I'm wondering if we should not agree on what precisely we mean by spirituality. When you say that you have to be aware of yourself, having self-identity, do we need criteria to determine when that actually occurs? And then who has the authority to determine that I'm spiritual and you are not spiritual? Because
good.
That would tie eventually
good.
to the concept of global
correct
citizenship.
Yes, yes.
Being aware that you are part of the creatures on the planet and having a sense of sharing.
Correct.
Very limited available resources.
Correct.
Because
excellent question.
We all know people who are very aware of themselves, who have self-identity and completely distracted.
Correct. Correct.
If you take a dictator,
yeah, Hitler.
Come from a country where
Hitler
are used to dictators and they are very aware of themselves.
No, that's ego. No, that's ego. That's the difference between awareness. I think your question is excellent. Excellent question. I am not sure that I will have all the answer for you, but I'll try, because I have really worked on this, but I don't pretend to really get to the height of the vibration you send me here with your question. So if I don't, my apologies. I think that spirituality is not religion. Religion has dogma. Spirituality doesn't have dogma. Spirituality, for me, and it's in a book called Another Meaning of Enlightenment, which was my first spiritual book after I retired from the bank, I give a very simple definition of spirituality and of enlightenment. When is it that things happen? Spirituality is the collection of instruments, actions, and self-realization to remember what your mission is on this planet. So spirituality for me is a mission-oriented thing. In this particular case, for example, maybe too late, many people realized that they should have never been managers. You know, that actually they act as managers because, you know, circumstances move them to managerial positions. Many people like me have realized maybe I should not be married, you know. And I divorced many years ago. Many people realize that maybe their love situation should change, you know, because it's not yielding you anything. This process of self-realization are related to who you are. Now, who tell you who you are, I'm sorry, don't go to any organization to ask them. You will find out. How do you find out? With very simple language. For example, one language is the language of happiness or suffering. If you are suffering, actually you are not in the highway of your mission. If you are very happy, you are. The body will tell you immediately whether you are or you are not in the path towards your enlightenment, with pain, with tremors, with heart attacks, with many things. You know, the body is a fantastic laboratory of signals to answer your question. Third, you should know what is not your mission, and this helps you to get many parts of it out to be able to have a smaller set of options. 4, follow people you think, your heart feels that they are on the mission, because the highway is the same. The vehicles are different, the missions are different, but we are on the same boat. You and I are not here just for random reasons. The fact that you and I met today is something there that connects ourselves. And all these people here are connected, whether you are sensitive to it or not. Now, I want to distinguish between ego and self-identity. Ego, it's what you describe, you know, ego for power, you know. But that's not inner power, that's outer power that comes from weapons, from having more money, having more political stature, and so on and so forth. Inner power, you know, whether you have self-confidence, whether you can have self-control, etc., etc. I would say to you something that I was not prepared to say, but you touch me with your question. If you really want to know, you need to have 8 very important things in mind. The first one is the right vision. Many corporations are failing, many entrepreneurs are failing because they don't have the right vision, the right view. You know, this country loved to elect President Obama because of his view, you know. The electorate in general, I'm an outsider, I'm not getting involved in American politics, but everywhere in the world you went, everywhere in the world I went, people wanted Obama to be President of the United States because they felt that he had the right vision. Second, you have to have the right intent, you know, the right thinking. This is why this dictator might have the right vision, might have the wrong intent, and then it fails. If his intent is my personal power, is my people, is my thing, then you're failing. Third, you need the right language. You know, many people I know in which state they are by the language they use. Your language was perfectly correct. So you are somewhere very advanced, by the way. But many people can have great expression of their vision and so on, but by the way they speak, the way it resonates in yourself, you will say, nah, this guy is not genuine. This guy, you know, no, this is nice but not good. Fourth, right behavior. You can have the best right vision, you can have the best intent, you can have the best language, but your behavior is violent, you know, like the dictator. It's not possible. then you have to have the right action. How can it be right action if you are killing people? I don't understand. You can have the great vision like Hitler of having a new race, but it was unacceptable that he will kill Jewish people. So the right action is very central. Then the right effort. Many people have great ideas, but they do very little to get their ideas, Or they expect someone else to do it. Hey, government, this is government, this is not me, Health service, government, you have better hospital. No, I'm saying to you, have better health. You can eat better, you can do something else. Next, right concentration. Don't disperse, my friend. You don't have too much time. I don't have too much time. We are not in the teenager's life where we are spending more than we are saving. Now, you really need to go into it. And finally, right meditation. Meditation not in a religious way. Meditation in a sense of transcending many things, having the capacity to go over the rocks. Meditation transcending from the material to the non-material. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm an aspiring spiritual entrepreneur, although there's very rarely I can call myself that in public. I'm fascinated by our collective potential. My mission is to bring the technology that is emerging at our time into society. We talked about universal values, and I just want to pass on something that I learned when I was at South by Southwest. Firstly, there are people doing this, and there are heroes out there that we can emulate. And one of my heroes is the CEO of Zappos. He's a value-based organization. It was him that recommended this book, which is the Happiness Hypothesis. And there has been some research in the field of psychology, a couple of local guys actually, Peter and Steelman, and they've come up with 6 universal values out of the various religions, Boy Scout handbooks. I just want to share with you the values that they came up with and see if this resonates with you. And the 6 top level values are wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I wanted to share that. Yeah.
Very good.
I'm excited to be in these times. These things are emerging.
Yeah.
And we're all part of this, and it's exciting to be here.
Thank you very much for this. I just came back from Thailand a few days ago. Actually, I stopped in my house in Portugal for 3 days, and then I kept running here to Chicago. We spent nearly 70 hours discussing something very esoteric, but not very esoteric, where enlightenment for Christian salvation is an individual thing or a collective thing. And this debate, at the core of this debate, is why humanity has much more ability to self-realize the individual values than the collective values. Why our debate is on social justice day after day after day after day. Since I am a teenager and I was running for president of my school, my high school, I remember using this word of social justice, workers unite, and so on and so forth. We continue doing the same thing. It's not new. The 4th of May, it celebrates a very important happening here in Chicago, 1886. And I think that I leave this with you. Why is it that we have easier way to deal with my individual values, who I think I am, competition, exclusion, all these individualistic values, this notion of success and failure, it's me, I need to have this capacity, this evolution, so my business can evolve properly and so on. why we have this problem with collective value. The second point is that we are now, a few years ago, and this is a fundamental dimension of 2012 actually, for those who are in that realm of debate, we enter the era of humanity as a collective. And we are forced to reorder our material world towards this collective. And we are asked to reorder our non-material world, which I call a spiritual world for sake of terminology, towards the collective. So my discussion in Thailand was whether this notion of collective enlightenment in Buddhism actually exists. And then I was asked to lecture the senior monks of this congregation about my notion of collective enlightenment, because I believe, not as a matter of belief, it's a matter of transcending, and finding myself there, that there is no individual salvation without collective salvation at the same time. And there is not individual enlightenment without collective enlightenment at the same time. This is like a funnel upside down, You do your things and then you go to the rest of the world. The rest of the world interact in a dialectic way with you, so you learn, come back, inside, out, outside, in, inside, out. It's not a silo thing. It's not something that this is like when you fly in an airplane, when they tell you about the oxygen mask and the children. They tell you put your oxygen mask first, and then help someone else. This is not enlightenment. Maybe this is good, to save yourself in the airplane, but actually I have the experience that my existence is completely collective. Your presence here, it's been resonating. Now, whether you have or don't have the sensitivity, I know you do, it's a rhetorical question. It's like this moment, this very moment, there is a tree that is 4,000 years old in the Amazon that is being cut down. We have no sensitivity to it. Are you having stomach pains? Headaches because of that tree? No. So until and unless you have really this core sensitivity to interdependence, it is very difficult to accept the notion of collectiveness. This is not collectivism. I'm not talking about that. And this is the big drama that most of the entrepreneurs that are working with this triple bottom line have more ability to actually be sensitive to this part and less sensitive to this part. For example, I'm a Maya priest, and I was taught by the grandmothers and the grandfathers of Guatemala how to talk to trees. Many people say, this guy, how come trees talk? Of course, it's not the language that I'm speaking. It's like animals also talk. Whether I know how the dog is speaking, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that the dog is not communicating. And my name that they gave me 17 years ago or something like that, I had no idea what it meant, Kamalbe, Kamalabe, Kamalbe. I asked the elder who gave me this, in this initiation as a Maya priest, what is the meaning of Kamalbe? He said Kamalbe is a self-sustained warrior who goes in front with a sword. For those Buddhists like Manjushri, you open the gate, the way, get to the gate, open the gate, but crosses last. So he gave me the example, you will go in front, will open the gate, and someone will say, where is Lola? Ah, Lola, yes, I remember. I met her in DePaul. I need to go back. That's the meaning of the name. I'm not saying that I am that or that I do that. So please don't take me wrong, because many times I really force myself into the gate, But I'm still too dense and fat, and I cannot get through the gate. You understand what I'm saying? They picked this name, And it is my life. I'm here doing that. I'm not here collecting votes or disciples or anything. I'm here sharing a message, as I'm doing it in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in Washington, D.C. in the next couple of weeks. And I'm doing it in many universities, It's just sharing this message that we live a collective existence. Please, those who do not understand, it means that they have a serious problem of life interdependence. Your genetic code is linked to my genetic code. And those who are parents here, who have children, you know what I'm talking about. I'm divorced, my children don't live with me many, many years. I know exactly what's happening to my son today. But if I say, I hope he calls me, and in 5 minutes, ring, 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 ring. So we have that experience of our genetic code. But we are also united to the genetic code of nature. Those who don't believe in this, please don't eat anything coming from nature. Okay? Because, if you are not connected, then you are eating intelligence of the second class. And so you will become really worse than I am. You understand what I'm saying? But also you have a genetic code of the spirit, which is your mission on this planet. I'm coming back to my friend. Your mission is connected to my mission. And the reason I'm here is because I want to be able to contribute to your mission, even with a grain of salt. And you already contributed to my mission with your question. And I think this is the essence of what's happening. That many people feel that their mission here is my mission. I need to run first. Let me have my sword or my bazooka or my Kalashnikov. Get to the gate and I will rampage the gate. But actually it doesn't happen that way. When you happen to get to the gate, many things are not like we think about it. I have a friend in Colombia, Roberto, who is dying now of cancer. And it's a big dilemma for me because he's a very good friend. And he decided to be unconscious before dying. So he's taking very heavy sedatives. So he is completely knocked out. And I was saying to him and his wife, practically his wife, because he is not feeling very well, be as conscious as possible during this process, because there is a lot to be learned. How do you become light on the other side? Yes. Yes, sir.
So it's pretty clear that personal ambition is key to spiritual progress. And in a world that's so passive on politics and history and so yet consumed with worldly material possessions, how do you propose that people individually inspire that personal ambition in others?
Let me enter from a window that is a little bit macro and then come back to the specifics. Who has followed the G20? Okay, at least 2 or 3 people. The G20 are the 20 presidents of so-called the most important countries of the world. It's a very self-selected group, But let's say that they are the top. At least they feel they are the top. Please read their communique. Their communique essentially is to create more consumption, to get the industry cranking, the banking going, and augmenting the rate of growth in developed countries and in developing countries. I think nothing is further from the truth. I think this is the most dangerous and probably the most short-lived suggestion, and they will see it. Let's say you have a problem with oil consumption. Excuse me. Good wine. Thank you, Pat. Let's say we have a structural problem of oil production and distribution, and you decide to say, look, this summertime, I want American drivers to drive on cheap gasoline. Let's say that this is a way to give you a present for the summer. So you supply the gasoline stations of oil that should not be there, but will be there, but somehow in the future, after summer, something is going to happen. Or you buy more oil somewhere else, which means the price is always going up, or you begin to increase the price of oil, so you discriminate against those who can avoid driving, This little example is very fundamental for what you're saying, because actually the trillions of dollars that they are being given to the IMF in words, because they have not really yet come into the IMF, to give to stressed developing countries. Not stressed developed countries, because I think the stress is more in the developed countries. Because this world crisis is more concerned about the poverty of the rich than the poverty of the poor. We are concerned about the banks. Of course, we make the argument, yes, but the little guy who has this little money in the bank needs to be protected. Yeah, I know all of that. The point is that a consumption society forever and ever is not feasible. There are no enough resources in the world to keep the level of consumption of the average citizen of a developed country. So if we give people this option to have the developed country as a yardstick towards which we all need to move, this is a false promise. There is not enough oil, there is not enough land, there is nothing. So you are creating expectations for a tremendous social revolution, in the South, because actually you cannot move to the North anymore, you cannot earn anything like the North, and so on. For example, the minimum income below which you become poor in the world is $1 a day, 1.20 a day. The minimum income for a family of 4 will become around $1,600 a year with $1 a day. A little bit more, let's say 2,000. The minimum income of a family of 4 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, considered to be poor, is $54,000. Yes, there are price difference, there are other needs. Okay, I know this, I work as an economist 45 years. The point that I'm making is that don't tell people in my country that are earning $2,000 a year that the yardstick is $54,000 a year, because actually there are no resources in Chile that will be able to do this. This is a nonsense. Now many people, and this is a tragic thing, many people are using the poor as the new consumers. So they don't see people in the poor, they see new consumers. In two ways. One is grabbing their remittances. There are two countries that have the largest level of remittances, which are the Philippines and Mexico. And so there is a big war about MoneyGram and all these people, who charge quite a bit to transfer money. So the Federal Reserve a few years ago decreased the rate. So if you have a possibility to send money to Mexico through means of the Federal Reserve, you actually don't pay practically anything, because they wanted to diminish the cost of transaction. The second way they want the poor to consume more is by increasing the debt of the country, So then you have microcredit, you use all this terminology that is phenomenally interesting. Why do you want microcredit, No, they need this credit, because they need to have better agriculture and so on. The poor has a pattern of consumption that is very unique. And so this influx of money don't necessarily go as Maslow would predict, my basic needs first, and then, I remember when there was an earthquake in Chile in 1970, when Allende was president. For those who have white hair like I do, remember that Chile in 1970 had a communist government led by Salvador Allende. So Salvador Allende, just being elected president, said, people, all of you will have 4,000 pesos, which was like $400 equivalent, so you can rebuild your houses. And he gave very little exigencies. It was something very simple to demonstrate with a picture or something that your house had some damage from the earthquake. You know what happened in Santiago? There were no more television sets. They were all sold out. The poor people went for television sets. Yesterday I talked about the example of our work in Senegal, in the northern part of Senegal. By the way, is that wrong? No. No. I didn't say this with a view for you to think that the poor is doing the wrong thing. The poor is different. In northern Senegal, anyone from Senegal here? Okay, my Peace Corps friends are here, but in Senegal we had a big irrigation program in the northern part, northern of Saint Louis, in the border with Mauritania. And what I found out doing research as to where they spend the money a large portion of the money was spent in building mosques. I did the same thing in Indonesia, and they spent it in improving their houses. So beautiful carved doors and windows, and people have their ways of doing this. We cannot impose them this, but a consumption society is not going to work. In terms of the individual side, my answer is shorter, but I think it's relevant, my friend, and I hope you see it relevant. You need to self-realize in yourself what is the vibration you feel, the rhythm you are in contact with when you are a crazy consumer, You need to have that experience. It's not something I can teach and don't consume more. Oh, Alfredo, this is your problem, not my problem. It's up to you to consume as much as you want. But if we live in a collective society, you need to understand what is happening to the rest of the world. But most important, what is happening to you? Because the rest of the world might be too far from you to really resonate with. I decided last year I have too many things. I need to download. I'm too heavy. How I'm going to download it, I still don't know, because I have 3 children who are saying, Dad, that carpet is mine and this is mine. But it's too heavy. My track is too heavy. I need more freedom. But that is an outgrowth of my own self-realization. It's not someone told me, give away your Buddhas and your carpets and your crosses and your Virgin Marys and so on. I have a lot of interesting collection after 29 years at the World Bank traveling around. A lot of interesting pieces, Finally, on this example, before I take the next question, is that I thought that many people will value the existing cultural assets they have rather than creating new things that are modern and interesting and not very relevant. When I bought my house in Portugal, it was almost destroyed completely. The beauty was that the roof was still there, because when the roof caves in, then the restoration is super expensive, for houses that have 1 meter wide stone walls, to really get another roof there is practically impossible. An architect came to me, to my house, and said, that's crazy, don't restore it. Just put it down and build a new house. Why do you want? I said, look, this is not mine. I'm just managing this for a while. I'll sell it and go. This is a very old Portuguese house. I don't have the right, if I can restore it, why not to restore it to its original style? But it's not shared by many people. Many people are saying, you bought a headache, and I did indeed. It was a terrible experience to restore a 2-century-old house, because you never know what you're going to find. For example, I was told by the architect that the water system was okay, so I bid on the price based on the assumption, it's like an inspection, that the water system was okay. And when we put heating system, they had to increase the pressure on the pipes, and after they went over 2 psi, they needed to go to 16 psi. After 2 or 3, the whole water system broke down. What does it mean? Rent drills, those big drills to drill all the walls and put new pipes. It's very expensive. Anyways, I can answer the last question. Yes, please.
I appreciate that the spiritual dimension of entrepreneurship is what we individually need to address. I'm really interested in the entrepreneurship part of that. One of the exciting things for me about the economy and where it is now is that it will force a lot of us, bright people, to be entrepreneurs. So I want to encourage all of us to find ways of living our spirituality through the work that we do.
This is a very good point to get to the core end of this presentation, is that enlightenment, salvation, is not the prerogative of lamas and gurus and priests and bishops and whatever, rabbis. If you accept my definition of spirituality, which is trying to remember who you really are in this planet, maybe as a shoemaker and hammering, on the back of a shoe, you might find the answer. For example, if my mission on the planet is to maintain the rhythm of the earth, the only thing I need to do is this. And if I am in that highway, you will bring me lunch, your bread, and someone else will bring something else. So enlightenment is in your own mission as a housewife, as a baker, as a salesman, as a corporate manager, as a lawyer. It doesn't matter, And so I can be a very good speaker, but I'm not enlightened maybe. So, you have to distinguish this thing, and I like the way you put it. Go back to your own self and trust that you are in that road towards your own self-realization, if you don't like the word enlightenment or salvation. But be aware that this is not an individualistic path, that we need to create the collective vehicle to be able to cross together. If you believe in reincarnation, and I'm not saying that you do, basically you come with the same people, birds of the same color fly together. Our generation of our age is here because we have not self-realized reconciliation. And so we send back to this planet many times, and we are at the time we need to reconcile the material with the non-material. And this is the challenge today. So don't try to look for some profession to get you towards your enlightenment. It has nothing to do with your profession. It has to do with yourself and not with the outside. Thank you very much.